Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, we're back. It's been a while. It's been about a month. Yeah, 2024 is here. MMA Outsiders, back in your life, in the words of Barriault Helwani. And we've got a lot that we've got to get through within the last month because Zain, it almost doesn't feel like we were on break for the whole month between what breaking news stream we did, what special interview, what the award show, the best of. It doesn't really feel like we've been gone for too long on a break, but we are finally back. We have a lot to recap, a lot that we missed in both the MMA and the boxing worlds. So we'll get into all of that here on the first edition of the MMA Outsiders for 2024. So there's some what we missed stuff. We've got UFC 297 coming up. We got a lot of boxing news that we got to talk about. It should definitely be a really, really good thing here. However, before we go into today's show, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, at MMA Outsiders ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. For those who don't know us, to my right, as always, is my great co-host, Zain Bando. You can find his work over at bjpenn.com and MMA Knockout. And you can follow him on social media at ZanBando99. On Tom Albano, you can find my work over at MMA News and Fanside MMA alongside the, I did stuff for the PFL in the 2023 season and hoping that I will be back for 2024, which will be a phenomenal opportunity. And you can find my work on social media at Thomas J. Albano. A couple of different changes, however, to our show within the start of the year. Not bad changes, nothing that's going to affect the format, but just some stuff that we need to shout out. So firstly, we need to shout out Wolf Spreads. Now, those of you who watch Empty the Bench Podcast Network programming, namely Football Friday, are familiar with Wolf Spreads. They have been a sponsor of the show. They have presented the show since, I want to say, week 8, like late October. And we've been having a lot of, Zain, I think you can say the same. We've been having a lot of fun with it when we do the Football Friday broadcasts. It's definitely a great way for those who need to get an introduction into the sports gambling side because it's fantasy sports gambling. So it's sports betting. Their slogan is sports betting like you've never seen it. And you know what? I love it. And sports betting for friends who love the action. Because it's a good way for you to learn about the aspects of gambling without having to actually gamble. So every week, they do competitions every week. You get 2,000 fantasy dollars, and you can use these fantasy dollars to make fantasy bets, whether it be betting on the over-unders on a competition, a money line, a spread, against the spread or for the spread, and you get 2,000 fantasy dollars to spend throughout the whole week. You get to invite your friends, and whoever wins the most fantasy dollars, makes the most fantasy profit, wins for that week. So it's a good way to, get an introduction to gambling, to have sports betting, have a little fun with your friends without actually having to bet anything and lose your house in the process.
That's true. And one thing I'd like to mention on top of all of that, and this is something that I think I'm the only person that utilizes this, but $1 per every competition you can upgrade to Wolf Spreads Premium and pretty much get the line, the over under, or the spread in the exact way you want it to get that exact perfect numbers. Or if you want to up your chances, up the stakes, or up the competition a little bit more, you can upgrade to Wolf Spreads Premium. Again, that's 99 cents per competition, and you can finagle the line as you see fit, which has been a major benefit to me as I've done very well on the Wolf Spreads front over the last month, specifically in the NFL, but we just wanted to shout out them as well. Another thing that I'd like to mention that's new to the show and something that I was inspired by because of the way we do our Football Friday picks is, yes, we finally have a UFC Picks Trackers. That's right. Tom and I are going to be competing against each other every week to see who can pick the most UFC fights correctly. We were really bad at doing this over the last 2 years, so I figured, well, it'll be up the stakes a little bit and actually have some fun and keep track of our records week to week. So I will be managing that. So stay tuned to see who wins on a weekly basis and cumulatively as the UFC schedule. Tom, what do you think of this edition, and are you excited for it?
I'm for it. Those who follow us across our social media pages will know that every UFC card, you and I are always posting our picks for that day. And I guess it's just a good way to really keep track and see who really does have the better picking skills. But I don't know if it's necessarily skills, as it is luck sometimes, but that's just the way things roll in the wild world of MMA.
So stay tuned for how we did on UFC Vegas 84 when we get to the recap. But for those of you who no, we now have a UFC Picks Tracker, so now you can see how between Tom or I how we do on a weekly basis, and then at the end of the UFC calendar, where we will tally up to see who beat who and who knows there may end up being a fun prize at the end, and that prize is to be determined as we have an entire calendar year to get to. But now we can actually get to the stuff that's more important.
Wait, Zan, hold on, you're forgetting something. We need one more thing. We're going to shout out. We have a new producer as well, so shout out to Pat Dana, who we have been having. I was introduced to Pat very recently. Pat and I were actually at the Cage Side Press Best of 2023 stream, where we talked with a couple of other MMA media members about what we thought was some of the best things to happen in the sport in 2023. Pat's going to be doing some more work alongside us, so maybe you'll see him pop in every now and again on the stream. He'll be keeping track of us to make sure, if we're saying anything that's wrong, or if we're uncertain about a certain fact, maybe doing some blogs for us on the ETV website, which is etvpodcast.com. There's a lot that Pat is going to be our right-hand man for this, and I think we're very happy to have Pat, and I think their show is going to go even greater lengths with Pat here.
Oh, just really quick shout out to Pat. I was more than lucky to cover Bellator 301 with him in Chicago, and he's just an absolute blast to be around, and he's just a great combat sports mind, so we're happy to have him here to add an extra layer of credibility to an already really entertaining show. So it's going to be the same there's just some new added bonuses now for all of you guys that tune in on a weekly basis to be aware of it. And again, we're super happy to have him, and we're excited to see the direction that the show takes, for sure.
All right, very quickly, just what we missed. So the plan was to do a few of these different headlines with what we missed, but considering some recent events, we had to take some of that and put it into our actual show. But so this feels more like plugs. So Conor McGregor has announced he will be returning in the UFC. He will finally be fighting Michael Chandler. And a date we have right now, which Conor announced on New Year's Eve, said he was going to do it New Year's Day, but I digress. International Fight Week 2024, which will take place June 29th. It'll take place about a week or two earlier than we anticipated. And it's going to happen at middleweight, which I think is the biggest, eye-popping part of this headline here. The fact that it's happening at middleweight, which he and Chandler have, as far as I know, never fought at before.
Yeah, this is definitely a very weird a discrepancy, considering, as you just alluded to, neither of these guys have fought at middleweight before. But at the very least, as far as we know, this fight is happening according to Conor McGregor. We've waited far too long for this fight to happen. You and I keep alluding to it. If you're going to have an entire Ultimate Fighter season and have neither of these guys fight, and you're wasting millions and millions of people's time of people who were genuinely interested to see Conor McGregor's comeback fight. So now we're one step closer to that. We're now just officially waiting on confirmation from the UFC. It will not be taking place at UFC 300. It'll be taking place at the June UFC pay-per-view, which is to be determined in terms of a number, but at least we are least we are getting the fight. At least we have a date, and at least we know where it's going to be. So that's a huge positive. And even though the Conor McGregor fight I went to was an officially International Fight Week that or in 21 that was moved to September, it really did feel like an International Fight Week type of feel. So it's cool to see that Conor is back on the IFW stage for the first time since July of 2015, which is crazy to think about. So
yeah, that is insane to think about, and it's insane to think about that July 2021 card, wasn't International Fight Week, but that's the 2020 and 2021 COVID years for you. I want to add, by the
exactly.
way, uh, I want to add, we're going to try not to delve into this too much. We did a whole breaking news stream when it first happened, so feel free to check that out on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network and on our Facebook and X, aka Twitter platforms as well. We streamed it there as well. Um, Ariel Helwani did tweet out after Connor posted that video. He was ready to go and was willing to go and wanted to go for UFC 300, but officials, I guess when he says officials, talking about UFC, talking about Endeavor, potentially maybe the Saudis. That there is a part right here about Saudis and Abu Dhabi, but we're not going to get to that just yet because of another recent development. So we'll hold that part for later in the show. But basically, they felt like there was a different way to best utilize Conor McGregor and his star power. And so it's International Fight Week instead. And it seems more and more likely, Zan, that it is true what I theorized on our New Year's breaking news stream, that the reason it's June 29th is because the next week, the time they would normally do it, WWE is hosting their Money in the Bank pay-per-view or premium live event in Toronto at the start of July. So it's what I'm theorizing, that I think you're not going to see too many dates, if any at all, where WWE and a UFC pay-per-view are going to go
No,
on the same date at the same time, with both companies now under Endeavor.
no, I don't think so either.
So there's that. We also had an interview. Yes, Rick Glaser, who has been a boxing businessman, has been with the sport for 33 years now. He is actually reporting, speaking of Endeavor, that Endeavor, the parent company of the UFC and WWE, is in the due diligence final stages of potentially acquiring Top Rank Boxing. Dana White, Bob Arum have both disputed the report, as is Ariel Helwani, though Helwani does note that the deal would kind of make sense, given what Endeavor and Ari Emanuel's mission has been in the world of entertainment and the world of combat sports ever since Endeavor, formerly WMEIMG, purchased the UFC in 2016. And
Yep.
we talked with Rick. We talked about, the similarities between this and the UFC's purchasing, the UFC being purchased by Endeavor in 2016. Why, what would change under Top Rank? Why Bob Arum and Top Rank would sell to a company that involves somebody that Bob Arum especially hates in Dana White. So Rick had a lot of good nuggets and such. He was a lot of great insight. He was a fun guest, and yeah, go check that interview out.
I'm gonna slightly correct you. I don't think it's Bob Arum who hates Dana White. I think it's Bob Arum who isn't necessarily a fan of MMA specifically. And he's even admitted in several interviews that he's never even met him. So I don't know if I would go.
But Dana despises him. But Dana despises him.
Yeah, that's known. Yeah.
But I guess in recent years, if we could have a Dana despises chart, I think De La Hoya has supplanted Arum on that list.
I think so too.
All right, so go check that out on the Empty the Bench YouTube channel. But let's get to the stuff we need to be here to talk about, which is UFC 297 this coming Saturday. Speaking of Toronto, in Toronto, and it's going to be headline. I mean, it's an okay card, but I think all the attention is revolving around one fight, and that is this UFC middleweight title on the line. Sean Strickland defending against my man, Dricus du Plessis. Let's talk about it. So, Zan, the circumstances we got here, of course, Sean Strickland wins in July. Dricus du Plessis wins in July. We have the whole very controversial Adesanya DDP running in the middle of the cage. For whatever reason, the UFC decided, oh, we can have Adesanya in the September card. I'm certain that the DDP Whitaker winner will be ready to go in September, which was absolutely bonkers insane, and I still don't understand it to this day. And so they throw Sean Strickland in there, and then, of course, one of the greatest upsets in UFC history happens. Adesanya is still away. Obviously, there's all the talk about, could he fight Pereira if the UFC throws him enough money and he maybe heals enough quicker. But regardless, he's out of the picture for right now. And so the UFC's hand, as it was in September, is now forced here. Strickland Duplessis middleweight title. And Zan, if this fight is anything like their little run-in the crowd last month at UFC 296 was, this is going to be flat out insanity. You even have Strickland threatening on a very recent podcast, saying that if DDP brings up his childhood again in another press conference to come this week, he has threatened to stab DDP.
Yeah, this fight is taking on a life of its own for sure. And I'll be honest with you, I think I'm more excited for this press conference than I am the fight. It is, even if the press conference happens, because you worry about those things sometimes, that we might have another UFC 279 situation. But nonetheless, this fight has been brewing for the last couple of months now. DDP's been chomping at the bit to get this fight. Strickland has had a meteoric rise to the top of the middleweight division, obviously with that upset against Adesanya in Australia in September. Even though we're not getting Adesanya versus DDP, which probably would have been the biggest fight in the history of South African MMA. In fact, there's no doubt about it. I think that this is a very solid consolation prize. I guess one thing that I'm curious about is I don't know. I just worry from DDP's sake is his dislike of Strickland and his just absolute disdain for everything that Strickland stands for as a person. In his opinion, is that going to come back to bite him at all? And if so, how is he going to be able to overcome that? Because he had to beat Robert Whitaker, or arguably the second best middleweight in the world, to get this shot, and he's been clampering at this shot for a couple years now. You've obviously been super high on him, but it just he need to do to tune out all the extra noise to ensure that he can actually realize his dream and become UFC middleweight champion. Because I have the theory that Adesanya may have underestimated Strickland a little bit, and obviously came back to bite him. And I worry the same thing might happen to DDP here. What do you think?
Yeah, so I have concerns on both fronts, Zan. So I'm going to start with the Sean Strickland front. And that's a matter of that exactly what you said before about DDP, that it's credit to him and that he beat Rob Whitaker to get this title shot. And you know what we've talked about, Zan, on our show about Rob Whitaker, Max Holloway, the quadruple A fighters, that they beat everybody else. They just can't beat whoever's in front of them as the champion. In Whitaker's case, it was Adesanya. In Holloway's case, it was Volkanovski. And then in comes Dricus du Plessis, who everybody started doubts. Even I, who have followed Dricus du Plessis, and I've been on his hype train since 2016, I was a little concerned going into that Whitaker fight. And he starts Whitaker in the second round. Knocked him out like nobody has, maybe other than Adesanya before. It was jaw-dropping and unbelievable to witness. So my concern on the Strickland front is, before the Israel Adesanya fight, listen to his most recent wins. Abus Magomedov, Nasruddin Imavov, Jack Hermanson, which was a split, Uriah Hall, Christoph Jocko, Brendan Allen, and then his losses were to Alex Pereira and Jared Cannonier. It's not terrible, but to get a title shot off of wins over Nasruddin Imavov and Abus Magomedov, who are far from the top in the middleweight division, kind of concerns me about Strickland's ability to compete with the best, even with the upset. Even with the upset, just considering that, he lost to Alex Pereira just before Pereira became the middleweight champion, and he's lost to Jared Cannonier, a former title challenger. So I'm concerned on that front. Strickland beat Adesanya. So there's no doubt that Strickland has what it takes, has the potential to compete with these top stars. But to actually see it in action is a whole other thing. Meanwhile, with Dricus du Plessis, as we mentioned, getting the win over Rob Whittaker really spoke something. And listen to his four most recent wins, Zan. Robert Whittaker, Derek Brunson, Darren Till, Brad Tavares. I kind of like Dricus du Plessis' recent competition a hell of a lot more than I like Sean Strickland's. Now, on the DDP front, what concerns me is, and I've been open about it, is his cardio. He is a guy who rushes in and will bring the fight to somebody and be aggressive, which is great. But if Strickland is smart, now we've seen Strickland be not smart and try to trade with somebody, which happened when he fought Alex Pereira a couple years ago at International Fight Week. But was in the case of Dricus du Plessis, he'll rush out, he'll try to get aggressive and attack. If Sean Strickland's smart, imagine if Strickland tries to hold him against the cage or bring the fight to the ground. That could present some problems for DDP. And if he's exhausted by the third round, that's not going to be good on his part.
No, it won't. Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to take away from what you just said, and something that I think people need to be aware of is the fact that, as you were kind of alluding to, the resumes just don't seem to add up, and I just think I wouldn't necessarily say Strickland was gifted a title shot, but off of the 4 wins you just said, maybe 2 of them, meaning Hermanson and Allen, are more impressive than in his other 2 wins, and I don't think you can say the same about DDP. I think his last 4 to 5 wins were 4 or 5 of the most impressive wins of his entire career. But I think something to also keep in mind too is I just think there's something about timing and there's something about the stars aligning. I think that this fight was supposed to happen as is. I think these two have been kind of in the rearview mirror, and no one really expected them to fight. But now that the buildup is what it is, and the UFC 296 brawl did happen, so he tells me that this fight was meant to be, and I think, given everything that we said, it's going to be about whoever makes the first mistake in this fight, in my humble opinion, is gonna lose, and it's as simple as that. DDP needs to be careful that he doesn't get caught, and Strickland needs to be careful that DDP doesn't take him down and try to wrestle him for 25 minutes. And those two things cross-examine, if you will, we might be in for a human chess match if we've ever seen one, which is why I think when you look at it from odds perspective, I'm surprised that the line isn't closer, because I not only think these are the 2 best middleweights in the world, but I think based on how this first fight goes, you could very well see this fight be the first of 3, just because of how evenly matched they are between one another.
So, that all being said, Zan, you said that whoever makes the first mistake is going to lose this fight. I just don't know, because I could see Strickland holding DDP for a little bit in that first round, but I think late first round, early second, I think there's a potential that Dricus du Plessis could rock him with something that stuns him and changes the whole direction of the fight. That it looks like, it almost reminds me, Zan, how I could see this fight playing out, how Sterling versus O'Malley played out, where Sterling got the better and kind of pinned O'Malley and just prevented his offense in the first 5 minutes. And you think the fight's going to go in one direction, and then O'Malley caught Sterling out of nowhere, dropped him, finished him in the second round. I could see something like that playing out in this fight, because I think as much as Dricus du Plessis, as much as DDP has the stamina issues, which will come back to bite him eventually, maybe he comes back this fight, I don't know. I just question, as you said, number one, Sean Strickland's resume with recent wins and the strength of those wins. And number 2, I question, you mentioned if DDP is underestimated Strickland. I'm wondering the other way around. Is Strickland going to underestimate DDP, or is DDP going to rile Strickland up to the point where it becomes like the Alex Pereira fight, where he tries to trade with DDP and DDP catches him? Overall, and maybe it's because I've been on his hype train for too long, but I have more questions for Strickland than I do for DDP. So at this point, Stan, I think you know the direction I'm going. I've been on his hype train since 2016, watching him win the ESC Africa double championships over there. and then he went on to win KSW, and he has been on such a rise that, like you mentioned, the stars aligning. Right now, I think the stars are aligning for one Dricus du Plessis. My official fight prediction: second round TKO. Dricus du Plessis is the new UFC middleweight champion on Saturday.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get an Ngannou as oh, but I'm gonna go one step further and say that I think it's gonna be the third round and not the second. I think the fight drags on a little bit and on the longer side, but I think DDP does enough for Strickland's gonna be tired from trying to out wrestle him, and he's gonna get caught.
I love it. So there's that. I've been on the hype train for too long, but at this point, I'm going all the way. So let's see what happens. I'm in DDP's corner, and I'm glad to see that you are as well. But then, one way or another, we are going to get an Ngannou on Saturday.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because for the UFC Women's Vacant Bantamweight Championship, we are going to get Rocky Raquel Pennington taking on Mayra Bueno Silva in a fight that I think a lot of the MMA community was very disappointed about. They thought that Juliana Pena would be healed up and from her injury and ready to go. It appears that it's not going to be the case. So the UFC decided to go with this consolation prize instead. This is certainly not a fight that I think the casual audience, let's put it that way, is looking forward to. But this is a high level women's title fight if I've ever seen one. Both of these women are equally skilled. Mayra Bueno Silva is an excellent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist. Raquel Pennington is good all around and has been around the sport of women's MMA for several years. Is one of the original pioneers of this division. Kind of started all the way back, and I think it was 2015 or 2016 or so is when her run and it started in the UFC. So this is one of those fights that I think has been brewing for a while. Although Silva did come out of nowhere after she submitted Holly Holm. So this should definitely be a very interesting title fight, and I think it's one of those fights where you could flip a coin and you know who's going to win. That's how high level this fight is. But what are your early expectations for this one? Or do you think, despite Silva's failed drug test, if you will, do you think that this is a fight that she absolutely deserves, despite her outside the octagon hardships?
I mean, Zain, this is kind of an interesting fight, and I'll be clear. Yeah, if Juliana Pena was ready, this fight should be hers. I went into the women's band after Nunes retired. I went in thinking that the vacant title fight was going to be Pena versus Pennington, because you look at Pennington's 4 fights. She hasn't fought in a year, but her last fight was against Ketlen Vieira. It was the split decision, and actually she's on a 5-fight win streak. Marion Renault, Penny Caziad, Macy Chiasson, Aspen Ladd, Ketlen Vieira. And I was actually going to mention before you brought it up, Zain, technically that Holly Holm submission is now a no contest on Silva's part because of the what she tested positive. Oh, Ritalinic acid. That's what she ended up testing positive for. And then you look at,
and she also said that she had no idea she had it in her system until way later or something like that.
Yeah. But then you look at her other wins, then. I mean, it's Lena Landsberg, Stephanie Egger, Wu Yanan, but she also fought twice in 2023. So you got another situation here, Zain, where you've got somebody who was a little more active in 2023 versus somebody who has the experience and has on the high level, that is, considering that Pennington once fought Nunes for the women's bantamweight title, and somebody who has the better resume. So at this point, is Mayra Bueno Silva, did she earn it? Yes, I guess, even though the no contest kind of shakes things up for me a little bit, and considering I don't think this would have been her fight if Pena was ready and the UFC chose to go in that direction. So whereas where I went with the momentum and youth, and well, I shouldn't say youth with DDP, but all the momentum and the hot streak with the better fight resume in the last fight. Here, I'm going to go with the better resume with the better experience one. And I'm going to say I don't think Raquel Pennington's going to do enough to finish Silva, but I think she has a lot more experience, which will translate into more talent and better lasting of the 25 full minutes. That I think that Pennington ends up coming away the new UFC Women's Bantamweight champion in a unanimous decision.
Yeah, I'm taking Pennington as well to win this fight. I think experience is experience, and I think even though Bueno Silva deserves it given the circumstances, I just think that as you alluded to just a minute ago, Pena was ready. She probably wouldn't have gotten the fight, and I think that the no contest could maybe paint a dark cloud over her and potentially the division if she wins. So I think for the sake of the division, Pennington wins, and we get at the fight that we never got to see, which is Pena versus Pennington, probably at some point mid to late 2024. So give me Pennington in a close one, though. I actually think it's going to be by split decision. I don't think it's going to be unanimous. I think it's going to be very competitive, back and forth. And Pennington will have to rally in 4 and 5 to in the UFC Women's Bantamweight titles. There's my pick for that.
And Zain, I'm going to hop on when you say experience is experience, especially when some of that experience comes against the GOAT, the women's
That's
MMA
true.
GOAT.
It's very true.
The rest of the cards, then, I mean, okay. I'm not exactly excited. I'm glad the UFC, didn't raise the pay-per-view prices like we thought they were going to, and that they actually offered the discount, which actually expired the other day. But, I mean, Neil Magny versus Mike Malott before the fight right before the 2 title fights. I like Neil Magny, but this kind of fight right before the 2 title fights, that doesn't scream featured bout to me.
Yeah, this is going to be whoever can get the most takedowns is going to win the fight. Is it not?
That's what this fight screams as to me. 2 ground specialists just going for takedowns, and I think this is another one of those cases where experience is just gonna triumph. So I'm gonna go Magny by decision.
Yeah, this is almost a great best bet to take the over for 2.5 rounds, because I don't see a finish in this fight either. So give me I'm actually gonna take the opposite though, and given that this isn't for Canada, I'm gonna give a little love to Mike Malott and say that he pulls off this upset, but it is going to be by decision though. He's not gonna finish Magny. I just think there are sometimes these themed cards in these certain countries where the main country can do pretty well, and I actually see him winning one for the Canadian side of things. So
a fun tidbit that Patrick actually brought to our attention that I now see looking again at Mike Malott's Wikipedia page. He hasn't ever gone to a decision. His last few fights, here's his record. He fought Shimon Smatrisky on Dana White Contender Series, got the submission in 39 seconds. First round finish of Mickey Gall. First round submission of Johan Lainez, and a second round submission of Adam Fugit at UFC 289 back in June.
Yeah, I don't see how he finishes Magny. I think that Magny, he's too tough for his own good. So I actually think that Malott's going to go to his first decision either way, whether he wins or loses. But shout out to our producer for the tidbit, and that is definitely something to keep in mind.
I will say,
betting this fight.
Yeah, I will say if Malott manages to submit Magny, that's going to do huge things for him. That being said, I'm kind of with you. I think the best bet, our MMA Outsiders' best bet, if you will, for this card would be Magny versus Malott over 2.5 rounds.
I think so too.
Just because given Magny's experience. And similarly, Zain, Chris Curtis versus Marc-Andre Barriault. Now, I remember when Marc-Andre Barriault came onto the UFC scene, he had just been the TKO champion in Canada. So another Canadian competing on this main card. It was a rough start for him. He, I think, ended up losing to, he lost 3 straight, then had a no contest. And he was in a basically must-win scenarios. And since then, he's won 5 of 7. In his most 2 recent wins, the 2 fights he had in 2023, TKO of Julian Marquez and unanimous decision over Eric "Ya Boy" Anders. And because I never get to do this because we never really get to talk about Eric Anders until he comes up.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, Sam, this is another one of those things where it's like, you look, Julian Marquez, Eric Anders, taking on somebody like a guy like a Chris Curtis, who has been around the game for a while. He hasn't had a win yet. He didn't get a win in 2023. He lost to Kelvin Gastelum on that decision. He fought Nasruddin Imavov, who we brought up before, with Strickland. No contest, accidental clash of heads at UFC 289. So I can get the feeling of why some people would feel like Barriault could get the win here. And again, this is another one of those fights where, like I said with Malott, there could be great things for Marc-Andre Barriault if he gets the win. And I think Chris Curtis is he still ranked? I have to double check. But I could see Marc-Andre Barriault with a win, potentially getting maybe that number 15 spot. He is still ranked number 13, according to at least the UFC rankings at the time we're recording this. So, yeah, if Barriault wins, he's getting a ranking here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think, again, this is another one of those fights where I just think even though Curtis did not win in the calendar year last year, he's definitely a lot more of an exciting fighter. And I think that Nasruddin Imam fight and the Kelvin Gastelum loss, both of those just gave him a bit better taste in his mouth, and I don't think he wants to experience it again. And so I actually like Chris Curtis to win this fight in the second round by TKO and get it back to his winning ways and do it in the only Chris Curtis fashion he knows how, which is just a wild slugfest. But I think it'll be a great fight, and it has a chance to be either a performance of the night potential or a fight of the night potential for sure on Saturday night.
Yeah. So the more I'm looking into this fight, the more I like it. And I know Marc-Andre Barriault has some great ground ability, but I could see this also being one of those fights where both men just throw their power shots. And I think Chris Curtis just has a little more in the tank. So I'm going to side with Curtis. You said second round?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to side with you. I'm also going to go with a second round TKO finish for Curtis. A little get back win. I guess we could call it the get right matchup. Like we say, the get right matchups in football during the regular season. Get right matchup here for Curtis. Get a win and then get back to some winning ways. However, Zan, the opening bout of the pay-per-view card really interests me, considering that it was not long ago Arnold Allen was fighting Max Holloway. And if he had won that fight, he would have gotten the title shot. And now here, we're going to have Arnold Allen taking on Movsar Evloev.
Yeah, I mean, this should be a very high level fight in that division, and for sure, this is Movsar's biggest step up in competition. And considering who Arnold Allen has fought over the last couple of years, Evloev is a guy that should not be taken lightly. So it should be a high octane, action packed, fast paced fight. Where I don't see how this fight goes the distance, number one, and I actually don't see this fight seeing the third round as my second point there.
Which is funny that you say that, Zan, because the last time Evloev wasn't involved in a decision, you have to go back to his fight right before he jumped to the UFC. July of 2018, where he knocked out Rafael Diaz to retain the M1 Global Bantamweight Championship at M1 Challenge 95. So
yeah, it's definitely a long time. And think about how long Arnold Allen has been around the sport and been around the UFC too. It's been several years, and considering the names that Arnold Allen has beat, he more than deserves being a rightful contender in that division. And it's crazy that Evil has just been involved in fighter fights over the last several years. So it's very unique that you bring that up for sure.
Arnold Allen from producer Pat. Arnold Allen has also had 7 of 11 go to distance in his UFC career. So I'm actually going to lean to this fight going to a decision, Sam. But I mean, Evloev, he's definitely one that, yeah, Arnold Allen is towards the top of that featherweight division, but his track record can't be denied, especially his most recent 3, Sam, that he's had. He's only fought once over in each of the last 3 years, but Hakeem Dawodu, Dan Ige, and Diego Lopez. And Diego Lopez, I remember when Bruce Pat and I were at the Cage Side Press Best of 2023 filming. We had a lot of talk about Diego Lopez and about his potential for 2024. And the fact that Evloev got the win over him in a fun kind of fight really spells potentially some trouble for Arnold Allen. That said, I think Arnold Allen has been around the top for too long. He's had such a meteoric rise that I think that Allen's going to get the decision win here. But whereas you talked about potentially Chris Curtis versus Marc-Andre Barriault being a fight of the night, I think this also has the potential to take fight of the night away from potentially Strickland versus DDP. So I say Allen by decision, but I think this one's going to be fun and back and forth.
Yeah, it'll be back and forth. I do think that Allen secure a late second round finish, but I could see this going the distance as well. Either way, it'll be a very, very exciting fight, and one that people who purchase the pay-per-view this weekend should definitely not miss, for sure.
I honestly think, Zain, what should have been done by the UFC, I think they should have moved this fight to right before the two title fights opened up with Bang, still open up with Curtis versus Barriault, and then put Neil Magny versus Mike Malott there.
Yeah, you could have very well easily done it, but the bout order is the bout order, and we can do nothing about it other than sit here and wonder what could have been, Tom.
Yeah, I know. Feature prelim, by the way, Brad Katona versus Garrett Armfield. This is Sanogo Katana's first fight in the octagon since he won Tough 31 and became the first two-time Tough winner.
Yeah, I don't see how Katana loses in Canada no matter who he's fighting.
Yeah, first fight since Tough 31.
Yeah, I can't see that.
Yeah, first fight since Tough 31, fighting in Canada. There's no way. And especially when he and Cody Gibson ended up having the fight of the night at UFC 292. It was so fun. Including Tough, more notes from Pat, including Tough, 10 of Katana's last 11 have gone the distance. Armfield has not went the distance in 8 of his last 9. So one of those streaks is going to end up, going up in smokes. And I think it's
crazy.
I think it's going to be Brad Katana getting a finish of Garrett Armfield just to rile up the crowd more right before the main card starts. So I'm gonna go second round sub for Katana.
I'm gonna go more conservative and say that Katana picks up a decision win, but I could see this fight being a finish too. Either way, I just don't see how Katana loses in his hometown in front of I'm sure a bunch of his friends who demanded that they would be either to see him fight. So we are both picking Katana, and I could easily see that being the case.
All right, moving off now from UFC 297, as we have about 15-20 minutes left in the recording. Let's talk about some of the news that's been presented to us. Let's start with a recap. Magomed Ankalaev. I mean, no controversies this time. He just flat out dropped Walker completely. I mean, the overhand right that he hits him with, following up with the uppercut, that was vicious. That shows you the power that Ankalaev has, and why you don't take a rematch with Ankalaev, because it always seems like in the rematch, and you saw this too with Ion Kutelava, that basically he always comes out with a lot more momentum in a rematch, a lot more focus, and credit to him. This is why I've been advocating for him all of 2023 to get a title shot in spite of Dana White's hatred for him.
Yeah, and I think he made his stance very clear at his in Octagon post-fight interview that he wants the title shot now. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want it tomorrow. He doesn't want it next week. He doesn't want it next month. He wants it now. Well, and to see if he actually gets the title shot this time around remains to be seen. But now I can happily present our brand new recently developed UFC Picks Tracker by yours truly. Tom edged me for UFC Vegas 84 little pick'em competition, going 8-3, whereas he went 7-4. But we both had Magomed Ankalaev and Miller to say for losing streaks after hot starts on the prelims. So there you go with that. Ankalaev would
put Miller on 300 already, Dana.
I know. Well, hopefully it ends up being Jim Miller versus Paul Felder, but that remains to be seen. Or attack somehow, some way, Jim Miller versus Brock Lesnar somehow gets sanctioned. But nonetheless, this was sorry. Go ahead.
Just to go back to the Ankalaev's point, if Alex Pereira was in the crowd at the UFC Apex, he would have jumped the cage, grabbed Pereira, and threw him in the cage to have the fight right then and there. He was that hot.
That's true. So as Pat alluded to in the chat, Ankalaev is the fourth longest UFC winning streak behind John Jones, Islam Makhachev, and Edwards with 10 consecutive wins. So Ankalaev looked very impressive and definitely someone who has more than earned his chance to fight for a UFC light heavyweight title once again. No doubt about it.
I'm for that. The problem is, it seems like Pereira, according to recent reports, the UFC's May pay-per-view will be back in Brazil as it was back in 2019, before the COVID years kind of screwed everything up with the scheduling. And it's likely Pereira would defend the light heavyweight championship there. The only thing is, I'm all for Ankalaev getting that title shot. And like I said, I was yelling for him to get a title shot all of 2023. But if Jamal Hill's ready by that point, you'd have to put him first, right? Brazil, actually, right before we start recording, thank you, Pat. Brazil has been confirmed. It will be in May as the pay-per-view.
Okay, so we could tentatively pencil in Jamal Hill versus Alex Pereira as the fight for the UFC light heavyweight championship, and we even have
May
a date,
4th.
May 4th.
May the 4th be with you.
Which means, Tom, would you guess that this is going to fall on the same night as a Canelo Alvarez pay-per-view against David Benavidez, or do you think they'll move it a week? What do you think?
I think Dana wouldn't be afraid to take on Canelo. He's already taken on Canelo before. Remember, Zain, end of 2019, because I was there for that fight week. They took Canelo Kovalev and they put it at 1 or 1:30 in the morning Eastern time just so everyone could watch Diaz versus Masvidal.
I know. And Dana laughed at it and said it was one of the dumbest business decisions he'd ever seen.
So he's not going to be afraid to take on Canelo. So I definitely see May 4th, Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. And then I guess then, especially Pereira wins, Ankalaev gets winner. Unless, of course, Pereira loses, then you could see a rematch and Ankalaev has to fight again. But
I think so too. I think you can pencil in right now. Here's my prediction. I think you can pencil in the winner of Hill versus fighting Ankalaev in the main event of the UFC Abu Dhabi card in October. And sealed delivered. That's what I think. Just throwing it out there. There's your potential right. Abu Dhabi main event for October 2024.
All right.
I just made it for you. Done.
Well, since you're gonna bring up Abu Dhabi, let's just go to the story about the Middle East now, which is a little more of a recent breaking news story. It's kind of breaking at the time that we're recording this. UFC Saudi Arabia, which was originally scheduled for March 2nd. Rumors were that it was going to be Shavkat versus Usman as a potential main event there. That has been pushed back to June. In the words of Ariel Helwani, trying to word it in a professional way, apparently Saudi officials were looking for a more entertaining fight card. So they pushed it back to June, likely June 8th, with a rumor that Islam Makhachev versus Justin Gaethje for the UFC Lightweight Championship would headline that card. So the presumption also was therefore that it would go from a fight night card to a pay-per-view card. So there's a potential we could have 2 June pay-per-views in a 4-week span, given Saudi Arabia and then International Fight Week with McGregor and Chandler.
Yeah, we definitely have major appetite for MMA fans, but I don't think anyone would be opposed to it. This is the right move by the promotion. We get to see Makhachev versus Gaethje. It's in the place it should be. Yeah, I'm all for this of no complaints, considering that March and April are going to be busy months for the UFC as it is. So I think from a business perspective, this is the absolute right move. What do you think?
I think, let's be clear. And I think even Helwani said it on his show. I was honestly surprised that Saudi Arabia was only going to get a fight night, because with Abu Dhabi always getting a pay-per-view every October, you would expect that Saudi Arabia, given all the money that they're giving to both the UFC and to PFL, and that PFL is giving them pay-per-views. Hell, there's rumors, we'll get to it in a second. PFL Bellator Champions card could be there. The PFL World Championships for 2024 could be there. I'm surprised that the UFC wasn't going to give them a pay-per-view in the first place. I mean, they're going to have, I think, 3 cards, they said, but I would have assumed that the first card was going to be a pay-per-view, so it makes all the sense in the world. But I'm glad you brought up the Ankalaev thing, because that's actually a good argument for giving Ankalaev the title shot, because if Makhachev versus Gaethje is going to main event June, and given the kind of fighters that Makhachev and Gaethje are, is one of them really going to be ready in 3.5 months to defend the lightweight championship against somebody, or a potential rematch? I don't know. So I feel
I'm gonna say no, because I think the UFC would run into the same situation that they had with the Australia debacle, where they blew it and made the fight on 2 weeks' notice. That's what I think.
But I think, Zan, with more expansion in the Middle East for combat sports, this is a situation the UFC is going to be in, where
I think so too.
You're going to have, as long as Islam is the champ, you're going to have Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi fighting for his star power.
Mm-hmm.
Unless
almost like fighting for television rights in football, but this is MMA's version of it, where they're basically fighting for territories at this point. So
unless Ankalaev or Hamzat Chimaev end up getting title shots and winning their fights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a lot to think about, but I think moving the card to June definitely helps, because it builds the Makhachev Gaethje fight more, and Saudi Arabia gets to have all the money. So I guess it's good for all of the partners involved. And
I am assuming, though, that the March 2nd card will remain, and they'll just have to relocate it, which tells me, Zan, Apex.
Yeah, unfortunately, we might end up getting another Apex show, or who knows? Actually, because I'm such a sicko, I'm going to do it. But
hold on, let me get the... This is where you were going, right?
Yeah. So in case you guys haven't watched the show before, I've been advocating for a UFC event to come to my home city for the last several years, because they keep robbing us of a UFC event every single year, and since 2019. So we're just going to see if there's any possibility that the United Center is open on March 2nd, and unfortunately it isn't, because the Chicago Blackhawks have a game. So if they were to move it to a fight night venue, it would not be in my city, unfortunately. So
well, what about the Allstate Arena in Rosemont?
Well, they've done it before, but I think the UFC is too big for that now. They used to do it, but they don't do it anymore. And I don't think the UFC is willing to invest when Allstate Arena is half the size of the United Center. But yeah,
Fair enough. Anyways, let's also just quickly to note UFC 300. So we do have some fights. Weili Zhang versus Yang Xiaonan for the women's strawweight title, which, oh, give me that. I have been anticipating that fight for a while. I cannot wait to see this fight in action, and to see it at UFC 300 is going to be great. Main event is still to be announced. They're kind of stacking the undercard with some names. Aljo's been thrown on there, but the big rumor at this point, Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. Now, it seems like that fight is going to happen at UFC 300. They haven't officially announced it as the main event, but given the circumstances, and it's looking likely that Edwards Bilal will be the main event of UFC 300.
Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. But I just want to call something out. I never do this on this show.
Yeah, you never do call out.
And I try to be as humble as possible, but I'd like to send a little herbal message to someone in the MMA community that made a video on the Weili versus Yang Xiaonan fight that just absolutely just really made my blood boil. You mean to tell me, Lucas Tracy, that Weili versus Yang Xiaonan does not deserve to be on UFC 300? Because I think a lot of the hardcore fans would say otherwise. That is a women's MMA fight fan's dream. And not give two of the best female MMA fighters in the sport of and that they deserve. So this fight being on UFC 300, even though it probably should have been in China, I am totally okay with it as a consolation prize, and I do not. I think it needed a 30-minute video explaining why it makes sense. So shame on you for disrespecting one of the best fights of the year because the card placement was in your ideal scenarios. That's my message to him.
And the thing is, Zain, if first of all, if you're going to tell me Weili Zhang, Yang Xiaonan are boring or don't deserve to be on UFC 300, go actually watch their fights. Go actually watch their fights, because that's insanely disrespectful. And second of all,
absolutely.
Second of all, I forget that this was, I think this might have been Helwani or might have been Luke Thomas, but explaining that, for business sake, considering that UFC 300 is a card that, hardcores like you and me are going to purchase for the historical significance, doing something like the UFC official brass is doing, like moving Conor McGregor off of UFC 300. I know Pat did put a note, but I seem to have lost. Okay, there we go. My mouse placement was weird. Pantoja also wants to defend on May 4th. All right, so that's interesting. I'm about to hit the hour mark. Yeah, so we got to keep this moving a little bit. But my thing is, I get why they're talking about. I get what they were talking about, for business sake, put Conor McGregor on something else. And this is no disrespect to Leon, and this is no disrespect to Bilal, because I love Bilal, and I think he does deserve a title shot, in spite of what other people think. If that's going to be your main event, and you're not going to have the star power, like with an O'Malley or Conor or anything on 300, you need the title fights. So Weili and Yan are available, so here you go. You just gave 2 title fights and a stacked card, which is what UFC 300 needs.
1,000%, and which is why I just completely disagree with this video, and I think the fight is going to over deliver, and I honestly don't even think it matters what card it is on, because the fight sells itself and is going to deliver, and it happens to be that it's a monumental fight for Chinese MMA, and it happens to be one of the biggest MMA in recent memory, and therefore I don't have any issues with it whatsoever.
Neither do I. All right, quickly, because this is a big story that we also got to talk about. So Day of Reckoning obviously happened during the time we were on hiatus. Anthony Joshua ended up getting his win over Otto Wallin. However, Deontay Wilder just completely bleeped the bed and lost to Joseph Parker in a one-sided decision. As a result, they are going to take that March 8th date that was reserved for Joshua versus Wilder, and they are now making Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. And now Zhilei Zhang, who has been the interim WBO heavyweight champion, will also compete on the card in the co-main event slot. Originally, according to Chris Mannix, the plan was Deontay Wilder. However, now that fight has been given to Joseph Parker. So, RIP Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder forever and ever at this point. I'm shocked that, Francis Ngannou is going to be competing. I shouldn't say shocked. He went toe-to-toe with the WBC heavyweight champion in Tyson Fury, but Francis Ngannou, for those who are saying he fumbled the bag, continuing to prove he did not fumble the bag, in spite of what you may think. And third of all, Zain, once again,
because of course it does. It's like we say every single week, but yeah, that's the hand that they were dealt, and Saudi Arabia is going to Saudi Arabia, and these are the 2 fights that you end up with, and I don't have a pick for either because these are completely fresh fights, but it definitely makes that whole week of March 8th, March 9th super enticing, considering that you have UFC 299 the following day. So it's going to be combat sports heaven that weekend for sure. And the these two fights should over deliver and then some. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And
well, Zan, there's 2 weekends where you have insanity when again heart and combat sports heaven, because you've got this fight on March 8th, and as you said, UFC 299 March 9th, and then you have on February 17th, a month before, Fury Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight title and UFC 298 on the same day.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's almost like we're living in a fantasy world, but it's actually reality. But yeah, it's crazy to think about.
All right, but I mentioned Fury Usyk, so there's a second part to the story that's also kind of breaking news at the time we're recording this. This news kind of coming out about 30 hours or so ago at the time that we're premiering the episode. His Excellency, Turkai, I believe it's pronounced Alashik. He wants the Joshua-Ngannou winner from March 8th to fight the winner of Fury Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship, which is nuts. But I mean, if what Rick Glaser kind of told us in December was true, Zan, the boxing commissions, the ABC alphabet organizations, they're gonna bow down to what the Saudis want. You kind of alluded to it before, Zan. We were talking about the UFC and Saudi Arabia. At this point, that's the direction that sports world, not just the UFC or boxing or combat, but the sports world has been taken. So I guess this is what we're gonna get.
Yeah, this is what we're gonna get for sure. And I mean, it's just one of those things where I think if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And I think all the promoters involved, probably 10 plus promoters involved, think that this is what's going to draw the most eyeballs, and this is what we're going to get. And no disrespect to any of the boxers involved, but I think that Francis Ngannou really drives this narrative, which goes back to our original point. Good for him. He's in the boxing business now, and he's getting the amount of money that he feels he deserves in the big fights that he deserves, and this is where he reaps the rewards. And here you go. So.
But that brings about 2 things, Dan. One, as we kind of alluded to before the show, if you're Filip Hrgovic, who was number 1 in the IBF, and the IBF had said that if they went with the rematch, they were going to strip the Fury Usyk winner and make Hrgovic versus Joshua for the vacant title. If you're Hrgovic, you're absolutely fuming right now.
Oh, for sure. There's going to be stuff coming out about Hrgovic probably in the next few days or the next week, I'm sure, given that these developments are going to be just breaking at the time that we're recording this. So,
and number two, which has been a point that's been debated about on MMA Twitter, is Ngannou ever actually going to fight in the PFL?
It's very questionable at this point. Very, very questionable.
And if not, is there a way the PFL can still use his star power? I mean, he is still going to be the man in charge of the PFL Africa promotion.
Yep.
All right, very quickly, last 3 headlines, little rapid fire, little big finish, if you will, for PTI fans. On that note, PFL Bellator Champions pay-per-view card, reports coming out, starting with Al Zolino, February 24th, Saudi Arabia. I'm interested to see what they're going to actually pull off with this, considering, OAM retired, considering what Chris Cyborg was saying. Although Cyborg is claiming that Kayla Harrison rejected a fight, so I guess there, will be no qualms if we get Cyborg versus Larissa Pacheco after all, as a potential, not just a potential fight in this card, but a potential headliner for this card. I know Cyborg fighting this weekend in her boxing boxing return, so a lot of questions, but I would be happy if this was the PFL kickoff event for 2024 still.
Yeah, I think so too, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with this card, considering that now it's going to be in Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure that it wants to overexceed Saudi Arabia's expectations, which means the PFL is a major challenge to live up to, and let's see if they can actually do it this time. So
for sure. Nate, speaking of boxing, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal to rematch in boxing, supposedly in March.
I don't buy this for a second. I don't even think this fight happens. I think even though it is being reported, I think it's kind of all speculative at the same time. I'll believe it when they actually step in the ring. Otherwise, no way.
I would have thought that Masvidal. I know Masvidal had the unretired tweet, but I was thinking at first maybe bare knuckle or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then speaking of boxing, one last thing here. Jake Paul has announced his return to the ring March 2nd. He'll be the co-main event. He won't be a main event. He'll be the co-main to the Amanda Serrano card in Puerto Rico. We still don't have an opponent as of the time we're recording this, so I'm assuming it's another tomato can fight.
That would be my guess too, and it remains to be seen what happens with that. But now it's going to be the only show in town, considering that the UFC moved their date. So congratulations to Jake Paul being the biggest combat sports event of that weekend specifically. So there you go.
It's a golf clap. That's what Jake Paul gets at this point, is a golf clap. Because, I mean, what a fall. Going from, the main events like fighting Nate Diaz to now being the co-main event. No disrespect. This is not on Serrano. It's about Jake Paul now being a co-headliner. And we already talked about the idea of, like I talked with Pat and the others at the Cage Side Press stuff about, could Jake Paul realistically be a PFL main eventer if they go with one of the pay-per-views, especially if Francis doesn't fight? But I just don't know.
I don't know either. And at this point, I would lean more 70-30. I doubt it.
All right. So that was a lot of material, but that is actually going to do it for this first edition of the MMA Outsiders for 2024. Once again, big shout out to Wolf Spreads for being the new sponsor, network-wide sponsor for the entire network. So shout out to them. We look forward to working with them. We already have with Football Friday. We look forward to the expansion, maybe some other stuff for the podcast network down the line. But for now, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at MMA Outsiders ETB. Make sure to follow the network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Once again, to my right, as always, is Zain Bando. Find his work over at bjpen.com and MMA Knockout. You can follow him on social media at ZanBando99. I'm Tom Albano, contributor to MMA News, Fanside MMA, and you can find me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. Once again, shout out to Pat Dana, our new producer for the show, always being our right-hand man. You can find him on social media at Pat Dana MMA. Those of you who are listening, who are watching us on YouTube, we thank you so much. And don't forget to check out our audio-only platforms, Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. If you are listening on those audio-only platforms, make sure to come to our YouTube home, youtube.com/ETV Network. Hit the subscribe button, just passing the 660 subscriber mark, continuing the climb to 700. And don't forget to go to etvpodcast.com. More information about the network, blogs, and so much more. All right, I think we're good. I think that's our first show. We can officially wrap up.
I think so too. Thank you again for tuning in. And it was an absolute thrill. And we will see you back here next week for episode 68 of the MMA Outsiders, where we will reach UFC 297 and so much more. But until then, and before we tell you to go enjoy the fights, we just want to remind you to be Joe Pye for a great start to the MMA calendar in 2024. See you guys soon.
Be Joe Piper. All right, for Zain and Pat, I'm Tom. We'll see you next week for MMA Outsiders episode 68. Take care, all.
Take care. See you soon.